the skill and the sort of the goal really for all of us is to try and find the benefit of both. Whether in my case, I think what I've realised today, talking it through with you, is that what I strive for is variety.
Hello and welcome to the Working From Home podcast with your host, me, Nelson Jordan. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be welcoming an old friend and colleague, Rob Jones, who is a B2B PR director. Hi, Rob. Thanks for joining us.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Quite welcome. How are you today?
Yeah, very well. Thank you. Not too bad at all. Weather's good today and close to the weekend, so no complaints at all.
Perfect. Rob's in the same country as I am, which is obviously the UK, judging from my accent. So we always mention the weather here because it's a really rare thing that it's very nice. So thanks for that, Rob.
Straight away.
Yeah, exactly. Rob has been gracious enough to join me today. We're going to be talking about working from home, his particular experiences and how he's found it. So hopefully for everybody working from home, that's you, entrepreneurs, freelancers, remote workers, online business owners. Hopefully we'll have something to pull out and some helpful advice for you. So Rob, if you'd just be so grateful to and gracious to talk through your career to date, probably from your time when I first kind of knew you onwards to what you're doing today, that would be really great.
Yeah, sure. So I joined the PR industry straight out of university. So graduated in 2009, got a job as a graduate account exec at an agency called WPR in Birmingham. And essentially specialised in does what it says on the tin really, specialised in PR. So you sort of traditional press releases, content, media relations, that side of things. Sort of as my career progressed and as my experience grew and as the agency grew as well, I'd say I sort of my skill set developed, and I guess the agency's sort of credentials developed as well in terms of more of an integrated proposition in terms of PR, social, search, and creative as well. So in the sort of 9 years, actually, I was with WPR. I progressed from a graduate account executive all the way up to a divisional director. So oversaw a lot of what the B2B team did at the agency. Like I say, fully sort of integrated proposition. My role really was to manage the team, but also to make sure that our clients, who range from plumbing and heating brands to construction products manufacturers, and everything in between, really. My job was to make sure that their objectives were served using the best possible combination of expertise that we had, essentially. So we always used to say, it was for us to make sure our clients were able to shop down the right aisles, to use a sort of slightly tiresome supermarket analogy there. I progressed to divisional director at WPR, and then about 5 months ago, I moved to Brand 8 PR, who are in Leeds. So a geographical change for me there. So family circumstances, personal circumstances led myself and my wife and our little boy to relocate to Yorkshire. And I took a role with a new agency called Brand 8, who are, say, PR and content marketing, really. So not dissimilar to the agency I was working for before. Quite a lot of emphasis on B2B, which has suited me down to the ground so far. Smaller agency, but still with the same core capabilities in terms of PR, content, social, and search. So again, whilst my sort of background and core skill set in terms of PR and content comes in very useful, I'm still in that position where I can bring in expertise from a social and search perspective to aid the clients that I'm working with.
Awesome. That's great. Thanks, Rob. And just to clarify for our listeners, Am I right in thinking that up to, very, very recently, you'd always been working in an office?
Yeah, I'd say 95% of the time actually. Yeah, so the whole time I was at WPR, really, which, as I say, was for getting on for 10 years. I was office based. I say office based. Obviously, there was a lot of going out to see clients and that kind of thing, but just in terms of your time at your desk was generally spent in the office, and a very sort of very open plan office, a typical, what I would describe as a typical agency environment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when did that change?
So that, I guess to sort of rewind slightly, for me, I say always, probably for the last couple of years, I've always had one eye on more remote working, for want of a phrase. I think quite common, my circumstance and the reasons for that and the motivations behind that. I had a little boy just shy of 2 years ago, and I think just that I'm not naive enough to think that you can pretend that you're going to do a full working day and also look after a 1-year-old for that whole time. But equally, at the same time, the idea of flexible working did always appeal to me because of just things like losing the commute from the start and the end of the day, having your lunch break and being at home, potentially being able to take the little one out to the park or pick him up from nursery and that kind of thing. So yeah, I'd say at WPR was my colleagues and the sort of senior management team at WPR were very, very open to me personally being able to work a bit more flexibly, but it never really got to the point where it was a formalized thing. It was still very much an ad hoc. Okay, you need to pick your little boy up from nursery. There's plenty of flexibility there for you to do that, which is great. I think I then started to think, well, if I do change roles, my next role, I would like to have that bit more flexibility as standard, essentially. And it goes without saying that we work in digital marketing a lot of the time. Everything that we do really can be done remotely, with the exception, arguably with the exception of some of the more collaborative things. So I do agree with the idea that brainstorms, meetings, that kind of thing can be hampered slightly by distance. But I think I'd say 75-80% of the role, I would say, can be done remotely, with the exception of the sort of people management stuff. A lot of that, I think you find being in people's company, being face to face, or at least having the opportunity to be face to face, does really help with that sort of people management and professional development side of things as well.
Sure. So in your particular situation, in this particular industry, when we're essentially under the kind of broad umbrella of marketing, so one of the things that I've heard, the kind of pushbacks against remote and probably what agency owners have struggled kind of getting their heads around, I suppose, and finding good operational processes to actually put this in place, things like brainstorms. How do we ensure that everybody's ideas and that creativity that kind of agencies are famed for isn't lost, which is, I think, a very valid concern. And also for things like training, in particular, when you're a graduate executive, kind of all the way maybe to, senior exec account manager, I think there's still a lot of learning that takes place just by being around people. How have you kind of found that? Have you had any kind of execs that you needed to, that you felt it was almost kind of hampered by this remote work?
I think the remote working, for me, I think it's a case of fine margins a lot of the time. I think when we talk about, ultimately, I think marketing is a very collaborative industry, and a very collaborative discipline a lot of the time as well. And I think sometimes it's silly little things that actually you probably don't think matter from time to time, but simple stuff like choosing one word over another for the title of a press release or a piece of content, for example, like that can make a massive difference actually in terms of how well that content is received by a client. Yet, I think when you're working remotely, I think it takes that bit extra to collaborate. I think it takes a bit of extra effort and a bit of extra sort of motivation almost. And it's convenient a lot of the time as well. If you're sat there by yourself at home mulling over the choice of wording for a sentence, or as I said before, a word you may use for the title of a piece of content. If you're in the office, and I'm big for this, I'll do this without thinking about it. If I'm in the office, I'll say, I'm just trying to work out which is the best word. What do people think? Should I choose warehouse or distribution center, for example? Something as daft as that. Whereas I think if you're stuck at home, are you going to ring your colleague on Teams or set up a Zoom call to quickly ask that question in a sort of a similar way as you would be able to if you're in an open plan office? Probably not. So it sounds very silly using an example like that, but I think if you sort of accumulate those examples over the course of a typical working day or a typical working week, you probably find there's actually quite a lot of things that you need to collaborate on.
Sure.
I think to sort of wind that back to the question that you asked about execs and sort of the development of more junior members of the team, I think sometimes giving those people access to an environment where that sort of vocal, oral communication and oral collaboration takes place, I think that's quite a healthy environment to be in. Now, I appreciate this is almost me arguing against remote working, which of course is sort of goes against the point I mentioned a few minutes ago. But I think what we'll probably come on to over the course of this conversation is there's a time and a place for both. And I think if you work for an organization which is happy to be flexible, I think it's about putting structures and expectations in place whereby you're neither one nor the other. You don't have to be chained to your desk in an office 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, nor do you have to feel isolated working from home 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. There is scope for there to be quite a large grey area in the middle, and grey area often has negative connotations, but I think in this case the flexibility that brings is very beneficial in a lot of ways.
So one of the things that I think about, and you're 100% right in terms of there being obviously very visible positives and negatives to this. With our particular industry, marketing, I think it's actually more visible than a lot of others. By nature, I think we attract quite a lot of people that almost feed on the energy of others and the inspiration and build on each other's ideas and creativity. And Brainstorms is a really, really good example for that, where somebody will just say something and that morphs. That takes on a different meaning depending on who's there and what mood they're in. And that's a really kind of nice way of accessing ideas. And I don't think, given that we're almost at the beginning of, this almost remote work revolution, we don't necessarily have all the tools or the processes or even the thinking to be able to counter this. I don't think anybody is served by us pretending that remote work as it is now is the ultimate answer, because I'd laugh at you basically. I just don't think it is. In terms of, you mentioned software there and the ease of just being able to talk to somebody and ask about a word choice, which you don't have if you're necessarily using Teams or even Slack, because that also has, on the flip side, though, positives, because you're able to do what we call deep work without people interrupting you. There's some work that you and I well know that when we needed to get done before, especially being in an open plan office, we would actually have to find a quiet space to sit down and actually attack that work and do it for an hour, 2 hours, whatever it took, really, that we just wouldn't get done with somebody asking us for their word choice. So definitely pros and cons. And I think the software that you mentioned there, how do you counter that for word choice? Okay, you might be able to put it as on Slack. You might be able to put it on a Facebook poll on Workplace. Do you prefer A or B? But the tools just aren't there yet to get that a immediate reaction without losing something in the interaction as well. But so just talking about your specific situation and how it came about during COVID, what was the decision that was made there? Did you go into work for a little while, or was it very much as soon as it was clear there was a problem, you were able to reduce the amount of time you worked on? Talk me through that.
Yeah, I mean, my particular set of circumstances are very, very unique in the sense that I started at Brand 8 week commencing the 16th of March. Now, for those that can cast their memories back to around that time, that was actually the week that lockdown measures were put in place, essentially.
Wow. What a time to start a new
yeah, exactly. Would I do it again with the benefit of hindsight? I'm not sure, but then, none of us have the benefit of, we all wish we could have the benefit of hindsight and foresight, I suppose, in terms of seeing what was about to come. But yeah, so I started my new job on the 16th of March and had always planned to, obviously I had a sort of bedding in period planned where I'd be working from the office to begin with anyway, because I've got a new team to settle into, people to get to know, processes to get to grips with as well. What basically happened was I had started on the Monday. I think by the Tuesday, possibly the Wednesday, people had been told, look, if this is starting to look serious, if you're more comfortable working from home, then you're very welcome to go and work from home. And this is from a business that I think it would be fair to say historically, not dissimilar to my previous agency, actually. Historically, there was an expectation that people would work from the office the majority of the time. So, yeah. But having said that, it was the sort of directive from our managing director was very much, you choose what you feel comfortable doing. If you feel comfortable coming into the office, carry on coming into the office. If you don't feel comfortable coming into the office, feel free to work from home. And, that's not going to be an issue at all. We've got all the processes in place to make that work. So me being the new kid on the block, I stuck it out for that full week. Despite the fact there were, I was well aware there were friends, there were former colleagues who were by this point already working from home indefinitely in light of the pandemic. So come the following Monday, it was, to be honest, things had escalated to such an extent that it was a case of driving in to pick up my keyboard and mouse. And that was that, really. It was a case of then setting up camp at home indefinitely. I suppose the other thing I should add at this point is home isn't actually home for me at the moment, because we were between houses. So we were selling our house in Birmingham and buying a new house in South Yorkshire. In the interim, we were living with my in-laws, so my wife's parents. And lo and behold, we're still here because of the circumstances and our house move collapsing. So again, it was sort of a very topsy-turvy time. Not necessarily a major issue. I've got enough space and a desk and so on to be able to work from. But yeah, at the same time, as it has been for a lot of people, quite an unsettling period, I think it's fair to say. So despite all me starting this conversation talking about how I had a desire to work from home more, I sort of went from 0 to 60 within the space of no time, really. And before I knew it, it was full-time working from home indefinitely. So be careful what you wish for.
Definitely. Our situations had some sort of almost a bit of a mirror image, weren't they? Because my wife and I have just moved from Valencia in Spain, 3.5 weeks ago. And now we find ourselves at our parent-in-law's before our long-term rental becomes available. So I'm very much aware of what it's like kind of working in somebody else's house, trying to get your routine down and in place and still perform, obviously, to the best of your ability in kind of less than ideal circumstances. And it's just such like a change for so many people, especially your clients as well. I think that's what we forget sometimes, that yes, you're working from home, but they probably are as well in a lot of ways. And they probably also have screaming toddlers and naughty pets and things to deal with as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's important to realize that, isn't it? Is that it's easy when you're working from home, and you quite naturally can feel it can be isolating at times, but within that isolation, I guess you have to appreciate the fact that there's a lot of people, particularly in the current circumstances, there are a lot of other people in that situation as well. But I found actually it was quite handy in a way, getting to know new clients for me at the time, because actually it's like that, the cliches, aren't they, about you start off a conversation talking about the weather, as we do here in the UK quite a lot. I mean, the sort of common ground is the pandemic, the remote working, how is it in lockdown? How's your routine going? How you managing to stay productive? You managing to get out and do exercise? All that sort of the obvious stuff that we were all talking about before the novelty completely wore off. But for me personally at that time, it was actually quite a handy inroad into a conversation with someone that I was speaking to for the first time. So in many ways, it probably was a good thing for me.
Mm-hmm. And obviously you won't be able to answer this in terms of the new agency, because you weren't necessarily aware of what was going on before. But how do you think processes at kind of agencies in general, or specific to the new one, if you are aware of that, have changed because of this, either on a short-term basis or the long-term?
I think just at a sort of very broad level, I think and I can only speak, like you said, I can only speak from the my perspective within the one agency that I work for. But I think what's probably happened across the board is more structured. I guess probably a more structured sort of meeting or internal meetings arrangement. I think. And what I mean by that is, because you don't have that opportunity to go, right, when everyone arrives at the start of the working day, you might have a bit of a sort of briefing session to kind of go, or start of the working week's probably a more realistic example, where you might all gather and kind of go, right, what have we got on this week? Any deadlines we've got to hit?
Any sell-ins that are happening on a particular day.
Yeah, exactly. Sell-ins. There could be pitches. There could be proposals that need doing. All that kind of stuff, as well as the the softer stuff like how's your weekend and all the rest of it. And I think from my experience, what's happened is the agency hasn't wanted to lose that, and quite rightly. So you almost have to create a forum for that remotely. So in our case, we were having a Teams call every other morning. So we do Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, where we'd all just sort of gather virtually and talk through kind of priorities, deadlines, sort of almost a bit of a work in progress kind of update, really. That did sort of slide towards becoming more of a once a week thing, but I think that was largely not because we'd got lazy with it or we'd lost interest in doing it or anything like that. It was just because as we got used to the remote working and the collaborate and the ways that you can collaborate via Teams, Zoom, and so on, we're finding that those sorts of conversations were happening more organically anyway. So it was just a case of us not needing to force it 3 times a week. We'd do it once a week, and then invariably, you'd speak to someone and have a conversation with someone on your team along those lines, sort of at varying intervals throughout the week. And in some respects, I think that almost potentially was better from a productivity point of view, because it meant that you were setting up those conversations and having those calls when you needed to have them, rather than, right, okay, it's Wednesday, it's 10 o'clock, we've got our sort of alternate day team catch up, without really thinking whether you need it or not. So I think in that respect, that sort of the level of familiarity we all had with certain processes kind of helped us to become a bit more flexible, but still maintaining that dialogue throughout the week.
I guess it meant that you didn't have to predict what you might be thinking about 3 or 4 days in advance.
Yeah,
And you'll be
that's
able
it.
to do that.
I think as well as there's a danger when you force these kind of things that you do become less productive, because you're kind of having a meeting because the meeting is there in your diary, rather than setting up a conversation or a meeting because there's a set number of important things that you need to talk about in that kind of environment. So, like I say, it's one of those, isn't it? We've all had to sort of feel our way through this process, and getting used to remote working, and that's kind of one of the things that I found sort of we eased ourselves into as time went on.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned Teams a couple of times in the conversation so far. Is that kind of what you were using for that immediate kind of feedback from people as well as the meetings, or were you using something else?
Yeah, so we were using, to be honest, we've used Teams very heavily, I'd say. So Teams we were originally using just for the sort of really for the meeting sort of functionality, being able to do conference calls, video conferences, and that kind of thing. But I actually found as time went on that the sort of chat functionality came into its own as well. So I've never really been one for that sort of flippant, off the cuff, short form message to a colleague when you could just, I mean, obviously in the good old days when we weren't under lockdown, you get up off your desk and go walk 10 yards to go and speak to a colleague about something.
Use it as an excuse for a cup of tea.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the old like water cooler chat. So I think the sort of chat function in Teams became the equivalent to that, really. So just the sort of I don't know, quick notes that just so you know I've done X, or when do you think you'll have this thing ready by? The sort of thing that doesn't lend itself to picking up the phone or sort of dialing into a conference, but you can just fire off a quick message to someone and get that quick update, really.
Mm-hmm. So if I had to push you, what would you say kind of the best thing about this remote working as you've experienced it so far? Obviously, with the caveat that this isn't necessarily what you had in mind when you first wanted to move into remote working.
I think for me, if I'm being completely honest, I think I've learned that you can be productive working from home. In some respects, I've learned that in certain cases you can actually be more productive because you're sort of by the very nature of working from home, you are more isolated than you would be if you were in an open plan office. So for certain types of work, as you've alluded to earlier, Nelson, actually, certain types of work where you just want to get your head down, actually, I think I would prefer to do that from home, or prefer to do that in a sort of more isolated environment than I would in an open plan office. But in terms of other things, I think trust actually is quite a big one as well. I think one of the things I think is quite important to consider when we think about marketing in the marketing industry and the sort of agency environment is it attracts a young demographic. So a lot of agencies will, the majority of the sort of workforce within an agency will be, I guess, sort of average mid to late 20s. And within that, you probably have a sizable proportion of your workforce who are in their first or second job, in their early 20s, sort of getting to grips with the professional world as well as their career in marketing. And I think one of the main things that I think has been great for that lockdowns kind of forced businesses to do is to trust their staff. Because I think that's been a big barrier, I think, is, right, okay, so we've always done this, we've always worked in an office 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And I'm not sure, as a sort of director or a sort of a manager within that agency environment, I think there's always been a slight reluctance to, not a reluctance to trust people, but a reluctance to try it and essentially see if it can work on quite a large scale. So there's a lot of businesses out there, and the two businesses that I've worked for, where I think it'd be fair to say both are very open to remote working, have been very open to remote working, but was there an inclination to let people essentially choose their working environment and the days they wanted to come into the office and the days they wanted to work from home. Probably not to that extent. So I think the fact that we've had that forced upon us has made a lot of businesses realise that actually we can be productive. The job can get done. Clients' needs can be met. I'm not saying that that's been completely flawless at all. And I know that there'll be agencies out there as well that probably really struggle to serve certain client demands during this time. But ultimately, I think from what I hear and sort of friends and colleagues and former colleagues who I speak to, I think the consensus seems to be that people have got on with it and have actually thought that this sort of I was really reluctant to use the phrase "new normal" because you hear it said so often now, and it's become a tired cliche. Yeah, but the normality moving forward probably isn't going to be 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, working in an office, and I think that's a real opportunity for businesses and for the staff that they employ. I think you can look at this from one of a number of different ways, can't you? In terms of if you're an agency with a massive office, could you potentially downsize your office and reduce your overheads by applying this more flexible way of working to your staff? From a talent perspective, could you attract staff from a wider talent pool, because actually you don't need people who live within a half an hour commute of your office anymore. If they're only going to come in once, maybe twice a week, or even 3 times a week, do they need to be living on the doorstep? Probably not.
I'd like to just jump in there, Rob, if I can, just because I think that is one of the largest things that I hope companies will take advantage of now. Like this, they've almost been forced to, you use the new normal, so I get a cliche as well. Think outside of the box and think, okay, well, do we actually need this workforce? So far, we've been limited by basically who fits the bill and can also commute to us, who lives within that commutable distance. Now, I've thought for a long time that there are a bunch of people that haven't, necessarily suited that traditional 9 to 5 work, not necessarily because of their personality, but because of their personal circumstances. And I think in particular, the one I'm thinking of is new mums or mums looking to get back into the workforce. And I don't want to exclusively say mums, I mean parents, but most kind of stay-at-home parents do still tend to be mums. And I just think that there's like a gaping opportunity for women in the workforce to become involved in some shape or form, whether that's on half days or a few hours, particularly with some of the things that we do, right? Where you're working on different clients at different times anyway. So it's not like you're just focused on one thing throughout the whole day. Yeah. It's a case of, okay, you might be employed working across, 5 to 10 accounts, depending on the size, or maybe even 1 or 2 accounts, right? But you could just as easily employ somebody, who's perhaps left the workforce, to have a child, for example, and just have them working on one client, and that's their only client, and they get all the work done over a couple of days. And if the client needs them, somebody else on the team will pick it up if they're not available. And I think that's, massive. I think it's probably in my head, not on the same level as, women joining the workforce, to join in with the war efforts in First World War and then Second World War in a much larger way. And then obviously when women stayed in the workforce and then there were fewer men around because unfortunately they'd been lost to the war, those women then retained their place in the workplace and had already shown their value. It doesn't feel like, from what I've read in history books, the same sort of momentous kind of occasion for women to step up, but it still feels pretty big to me in terms of what could potentially happen when there's just more equality given to, staying at home and still getting the work done. I was obviously with you at WPR, and some of the most productive people there were women who had young children and were only working 2 or 3 days a week. They tended to come in, absolutely smash it for a couple of days, and then leave again because they knew they were on such a tight deadline to just get things done. So I think there's definitely going to be more calls for that, particularly at the senior levels. Like, in particular, if we talk about demographic changes and you've got more women waiting longer than ever before to have children, by that time, particularly in our industry, it's a very young industry, then we tend to lose people at about the account director level. When they start to have children and perhaps go down to a couple of days, and maybe they re-enter the workforce at some point, maybe they don't. And that's a massive talent drain gone. That's so much knowledge that just almost evaporates and the agencies can't use anymore. And I think, I hope this isn't the case, but I think it probably is. When more women probably get to that sort of age where people are kind of eyeing them and saying, and I think this about both male and women, male and female employers, they probably start to think, should I put that person on this new account, this big account that we've won? There's a chance that they'll be leaving in the next 6 months, a year or something to have children. And you'd like to think that doesn't happen, but I think we all know full well that it probably does. And I'm hoping changes like this will hope to kind of mitigate that slightly. Do you think that's a reasonable expectation at all?
I think there's definitely validity in a lot of what you've said, and it resonates with me actually. My wife, she works in PR and marketing as well, and you've kind of described part of what you've just said there. Has described her sort of career direction and career change, in the sense that she worked her way up to account director level within a marketing agency. And then we had our little boy, and she decided after maternity leave that she didn't want to go back into that environment. She wanted to set up as a freelancer. So that's what she's done, and touch wood and all the rest of it. She worked very hard, and it's been a success so far. But I know exactly what you mean, in the sense that I've heard, there are numerous examples even within my network of former colleagues or friends or sort of acquaintances of mine who have followed a similar path. And you do kind of wonder to what extent, had there been more openness towards flexible working from the agency's point of view, would those individuals feel like they would prefer to go freelance and essentially go it alone? Because, and again, this is purely speaking from our own, my perspective and my family's perspective, but my wife did set up as a freelancer purely because of the flexibility and the ability to spend more time with our little boy and to take on the vast majority of the childcare duties. And it's worked a treat, but you do kind of look at it sometimes and go, could there have ever been an option for you to have stayed within your agency environment before and still had the benefits of that flexibility? And almost certainly, I would guess agencies will be more willing to do that now after experience in the last few months than they would have been, again, before it was forced upon them.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think a lot of women in particular who have children tend to set up as freelancers because they felt there was no other option if they still wanted to use their skill set and still make money in the same way, and obviously have that flexibility. That's not to say all of them. Obviously, lots of us, like myself, have chosen to be a freelancer when I had plenty of other options, but just that was what I wanted to do because it suited me. But I think there's probably some people out there that picked it because it was the least bad option, I suppose. And being a freelancer isn't, it's not all great. It comes with, I think, kind of added pressure. because the main thing for me is like, if you don't win your clients, you don't have any clients. And that kind of pitching or showcasing your work or trying to build a network so you have inbound leads, that isn't for everybody. And, you know, that doesn't make their skill set less legitimate. It quite often just comes down to preference, I think. Yeah. And so there's something to be said, right? If you can remain working for an agency and you don't particularly want to do everything like accounting and invoicing and, you know, managing your own deadlines and winning business and that sort of thing, you know, having an agency there who are effectively handing you your clients at the beginning of every month, you know, the same clients as last month plus new projects. Yeah. And also you've got a guaranteed wage coming in, which obviously isn't the case for kind of any freelancers really. So I would just like to see more agencies in particular, because this is kind of the industry that we're talking about at the moment, kind of adapt to that and realize that, hey, like this could be, as an agency, our competitive advantage. If other agencies are really reluctant to take people that have been out of the workforce, like I'm not, we're going to jump on those people, because not only do they have really valuable skill sets and a ton of experience, they've also got, you know, a massive network, you know, that they've made over 10, 15 years of potential clients as well, and potential people in the industry that you can use to your advantage. So I think there's a lot of value, it is my understanding, a lot of value going missing at the moment. And I'm kind of hoping that changes, that we can recognize those people that traditionally have missed out and have been undervalued and underserved. That's personally what I hope is the biggest thing that comes out of this for me. So we talked obviously about some of the good things. What have you not been so keen on? Obviously, because you originally wanted to kind of maybe, was it like 2 or 3 days that you wanted originally, like routinely?
Yeah, I mean, I'd not quite necessarily put a figure on it. I think I'd sort of worked on the basis that, and my current agency, sort of the conversation I'd had leading up to joining was a day a week working from home. You know, over time, it may be that there's scope to do more. It may be that there's certain weeks that I would actually feel the benefit of working from the office for that whole week, for example. But so I hadn't been quite so sort of prescriptive with that and had a clear idea in my mind. In terms of your question about some of the negatives or some of the challenges is probably the better word. And we work in marketing, so we always try and, you know, use constructive language.
You've always been a lot better at being diplomatic than I have, Rob.
Yeah, well, yeah, I try my best. Yeah, I think in terms of some of the challenges that I've found, I think in the early stages of lockdown were really challenging. I think probably without us all realizing it, to be completely honest. I think we were all so limited in terms of what we were actually able to do almost legally, that it was kind of, I found myself in a position where while I was trying to leave the house and go for a walk, or, you know, take my little boy out for a walk over lunchtime or whatever, occasionally if you had something to do with work and you decided maybe to take a shorter lunch or not necessarily take a lunch that day, before you know it, you've done 3 or 4 days solid without leaving the house, and you kind of sat there going, this can't be good for me. I appreciate that, you know, this isn't the norm in terms of just remote working generally. That wouldn't be a normal situation to be in, but it did make me realize that yes, you're working from home and there is flexibility that comes with that. You need to take advantage of that flexibility, don't you? You know, if I was in an office, I wouldn't stay in the office from the minute I arrive till the minute I leave. I would probably go out. I'd probably go out over lunchtime for a walk, or to go to pick up a sandwich from the nearby shop or whatever. So I think that sort of getting up and about, stretching your legs, sounds really obvious, doesn't it? But just getting some fresh air, that that can be quite challenging. I think the main one for me, if I'm being honest, I actually didn't realise I'd sort of struggled with until I went back into the office, which was about 2 weeks ago, and that was the commute. And that sounds stupid because I've obviously said, one of the reasons why I'd always wanted to work from home is because, to me, the idea that I don't know what the actual figure is, but 80-90% of the British population all travel into urban centres to work at 9 o'clock in the morning, and all travel out of them again at sort of 5:30 in the evening. It just seems mad in terms of productivity. We're all stuck in traffic for longer than we need to be, and you sort of go, even if I'm not putting that time towards work, I could be putting that time towards just finding a bit more headspace, relaxing, just something better than sitting in a car in traffic, frankly. But then on the flip side of that, what I realized when we went back into work and I had the commute again was that I'd actually really missed the that sort of barrier between home and work. So, to begin with, this idea that I could be playing with dinosaurs with my little boy at 5 to 9 in the morning.
Let's not pretend your little boy is with you playing with dinosaurs, Rob.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah, building my Duplo set at 5 to 9 in the morning. But yeah, this idea that I could be sort of in parent mode, home mode at 5 to 9, and then be on a conference call at 9 o'clock. You kind of go, oh, that's brilliant. That's flexible work in its finest. It's making the most of your time because you're not stuck in a car between, 8:15, 8:30 and 9 o'clock. But actually what I think I hadn't realized I'd missed is the sort of getting your head in the right zone. So the switching off from home and being a parent, or being a husband, a partner, whatever it might be, to being a director at a PR agency or whatever it might be. So I think the big thing that I've learned, and that isn't me saying as well, I feel like I've said a lot of things that are almost positives about being in the office and negatives about working from home. But I think actually what it's taught me is, if you're working from home, you still need to do something to sort of activate work mode and something to deactivate work mode at the end of the day, because it can take a lot of time to switch on and switch off again.
That's so key, and that is probably the thing that I find hardest. I probably have more experience than the average person that was kind of forced into this working from home situation, in that I've been a freelancer, but only for the last year and a half. But I work in my home, especially at the moment I'm in somebody else's home, my wife's parents' house, and I work in a room that they've been kind enough to kind of vacate for me. So it's got a sofa on, but I spend all day in this room, and it's the same room that I relax in at night, and my laptop is just almost staring at me saying like, open me, Nelson, open me. Reply to this email, or pitch another client, or write another blog post or something. Not in that weird voice, but maybe even weirder. Like,
get in that weird voice.
Definitely in the weird voice. But that kind of ritual has got something to be said for it. Leaving the house, closing the door, getting in your car, or popping on the bus or subway, whatever, and popping in your headphones or putting your radio on and listening to songs or podcasts. Well, podcasts are a good one, by the way. Shout out to the Working From Home podcast. Anyway, there's that sort of separation via this ritual that you do every day that almost programs your brain to be like, okay, I've gone from home, this is something else, and this is work. And then in reverse, when you're leaving work at the end of the day, that is work done for the day. I'm going to have this ritual, and when I get home, I'm then into home mode. And when you're working at home all the time, you're almost stuck into this you're in the same environment all the time. You almost need to create some sort of artificial ritual, I think, to break you out of that mindset. I haven't mastered this yet, not even close. I worked a ridiculous amount in July, 6 or 7 days a week, 10 to 14 hours a day. It was pretty savage. But I'm just trying to build up my freelance copywriting business at the moment, and I'm not definitely planning on that being the same going forward. But this is the thing that I'm trying to grapple with at the moment. Like, how do I create that break or that kind of firewall in between the two parts of my life? Have you got anything that you've been able to do?
To be honest, it's been difficult because of the circumstances, I think. And just to sort of build on the point that you mentioned there, actually, now, so there's people that I've spoken to, my mum being one, actually, who really haven't taken well, I think it's fair to say, to the remote working sort of enforcement, in the sense of what it's essentially done is it's forged associations, and not always good associations, with sort of certain areas of the house, the home, I should say, and the connotations involved with work. So, I know numerous people who maybe work in quite high pressure environment, or maybe work with a sort of a manager or a boss who's very, very sort of demanding. And
you're so diplomatic, Rob. I just admire that about you. A demanding manager is what we're calling a boss from hell.
Basically, yeah. I'm not naming. There's not necessarily individuals I've got in mind. Just sort of
situations.
You're aware of these situations happening where people go into work, and they like to go into work, they do their job, they come away from work at the end of the day, and that is that. And that's a certain type of job as well that allows you to do that. But I think when you combine a job like that with the home, which is where you're supposed to, relax, that's where you spend your downtime and so on, that can create some real problems, I think. And there's definitely examples out there of people who kind of almost, and again, I'll use my mum as an example, actually. She referred to a certain period of sort of lockdown where she almost didn't want to go into a certain room in the house that she'd been working from, because she'd started to associate it with work. So you kind of look at that and go, that has therefore created a problem rather than an opportunity. So I think there's a lot of fine tuning, I think, that needs to go on in terms of, those people who are looking to work from home more, or are likely to be forced to work from home more. I think there's still a lot of fine tuning to be done. But I think I haven't got a magic bullet that I would say is the solution to this. But I think people have got to look at ways, I think, to separate work and home life, for want of a better phrase. I think that's really, really, really important, because otherwise you're in that position where you find it really, really difficult to switch off. You're working really, really long hours, which in some respects you may not even need to, but as you said before, your laptop's there. So, if I just spend another 20 minutes on that job I was doing earlier, then it'll make tomorrow a more relaxing day. But before you know it, you spent 2.5 hours, 3 hours at your laptop, and you haven't had an evening to yourself. So there's one sort of little intention, I think, can lead into something that starts to be all encompassing.
Yeah, like 100%. You've got a really weird situation where it's almost kind of like the creativity stuff that we talked about before, and being in person to have brainstorms. You could counter that by saying, actually, for something that does require that creativity, like being in an office 9 to 5 probably isn't the optimal way to achieve that. Kind of forcing people to go through this like slog or routine, probably isn't optimal for creativity. But at the same time, if you're going to be doing as I did in July and working all hours under the sun, That's not great for creativity either. Like, regardless of whether you're spending the time commuting or sat there looking at your laptop, wishing like the power would go out just to give you an excuse to stop. So I think there's some awareness, and probably more people, like hopefully scientists, business leaders, policymakers, change makers, that sort of thing, will be paying more attention to this stuff. I think, remote working isn't going away. There'll be certain industries and certain employers that wish that it would. In my eyes, it's not going anywhere. I think it's going to be I think it's going to become more prolific as the years go on, and as technology kind of improves to keep pace. The technologists that I've come across have this unfortunate and probably naive, Pollyannish assumption that technology is going to be the savior of everything. Make the argument that as much problems have been caused by technology as I wouldn't go that far, but I could always point out a counter case for that.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's necessarily some sort of technology that's going to be the answer here to that change, to that separation that we were talking about. I think it's going to be an awareness of, human behavior, psychology, and probably biology as well. Like how our brains actually cope with this amount of screen time, and this kind of almost merging of what used to be two completely separate environments. You used to have home, you used to have work, and they were two completely different places, like in terms of geolocation. And I think there was some psychological element which let you separate the two in your brain as well.
Yeah,
and
I think that's really
a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. I think the other thing we have to remember, and again, this may be me speaking from the perspective of someone who works for a PR or marketing agency, but I think variety is what can be very motivating. From my perspective, why did I decide that I wanted to work for a PR agency? It was because of the variety. You get to work on different clients in different industries. You get to work with different types of people. You get to go to meetings in different types of environment and all that kind of stuff. And that for me has always been very motivating. So when I talk about my desire to do more remote working, in a sense, I think it's fed by that need for variety, where I don't want to be glued to a desk in an office 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, nor do I want to be glued to my desk at home 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. So it's about finding that happy medium and thinking, right, okay, so it may be that you decide that you're working from home 1 or 2 days a week. It allows you to plan your week and go, well, on those 1 or 2 days, let's do the stuff that I know I can do really, really well in that kind of environment. And then conversely, on the days when you're in an office environment, again, it's a case of, right, okay, we're in the office on these days. What are the things that I need to get out of being in this environment? Of course, it's not as black and white as that. And there's going to be times when you'll be in the office and you'll find yourself needing to do that sort of deep concentration type work where you really have to get your head down. But I think, again, the flexibility and the variety at least gives you the option of being able to segregate your work and be able to do the parts of your job that lend themselves to a particular type of environment and vice versa.
No, that's a really interesting way to think. I think there's, as you say, like the thing that's kind of keeps coming to the forefront for me is that there are pros and cons of both, and that variety kind of allows you to almost mitigate the negatives of both to some degree. Definitely not to 100%, but you get almost the best of both worlds when you are able to combine, the good points of working from home, i.e., the flexibility and the amount of hours not spent traveling, but there are also really great points of working and being part of a community and having actual face-to-face discussions. One of the things that I found from a personal level, especially being in Spain for the last 3 years, where my Spanish is passable, I suppose, providing you don't ever ask me any
Go on.
Spanish. No, that's the same in Spanish. But I also found that was a bit of a barrier for me in terms of going out and communicating with people, given that I was working from home. Whereas if I'd been in an English-speaking office, I'd at least have, that sort of communication on a daily level, and then outside it wouldn't have been so kind of isolating, I suppose. Well, I found, being in isolation in particular, on top of being a freelancer, very, very lonely at points. I felt like, man, I would love to just see somebody face to face, that as much as I love her, my wife, and she'll say the same thing about me, but 100 times more, just somebody different to, that you engage with in a different way. You have a different relationship with them. You talk about different things. You act a different way with them. And like, as a freelancer, I think that is, for me, one of the biggest negatives. I think that's why so many people do these like meetups and in-person groups to find ways around that. I'm not sure they counter them as well as they could do.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, like that's raised an interesting point, and almost a question I'd have for you actually as well, which is how do you find the sort of lack of validation for what you're doing? Because I think one of the other things that I did find difficult to begin with as well is when you're not in that environment where you're sort of in a room with people, that sort of opportunity for your colleague, and this is going to make me sound really needy now, I'm afraid, but which I like to think I'm not, but that lack of someone just going, oh yeah, that's a really good point actually that you've just made, or yeah, that piece of work that you've just printed off, it looks, I really like what you've done with the title, or those kind of little throwaway comments that actually, again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Are you going to ring someone on Teams to give that feedback? Probably not, because it's just quite a flippant, off the cuff remark. But actually, I think it's really really important that people still get that. I think it's something that I certainly felt that was missed in the early days, where you feel like there's a lot of work to be done, and you're doing the work, and you're sort of hoping that it's hitting the spot, and you're hoping, and even when you're confident you're delivering to a high standard, there's no substitute for someone just going, yeah, that was really good, or oh, thanks for doing that, or you've made a really good fist of that. And you as a freelancer must find that, lockdown or no lockdown, that's a sort of a dynamic that you don't have instant access to at all, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've found that, and not just in the needy please compliment me way, but also from
it's just me.
It's just you, Rob.
Yeah.
From the negative critiques, and not negative as in somebody trying to put you down, but somebody genuinely trying to improve your work. None of us do this kind of work in isolation. We can't produce absolute masterpieces at the frequency that we work for different clients. I was very much used to working at an agency where one person would have an idea and then other people would build on it, and you'd be kind of almost having this organic, unforced back and forth to arrive at the finished product. As a freelancer, you don't get that. Particularly as when you're ever working in an industry and you get hired by somebody who has a very low base of knowledge for what you're doing, which is, I think that is primarily a lot of the time why we get hired in the first place, right? Because a business owner wants to just get on and do the things that they're really good at running the business. Yeah. Whether that's bringing in new clients or handling the operation side or managing their employees, they don't necessarily want to come they don't want to get involved for somebody like your case to do PR. Or for my case, like they don't want to get involved in the copywriting. They're not going to produce their own websites, their own sales pages, email funnels, whatever it is. So when I produce a piece of work and, hand it back to the client and say, okay, this is, draft one, this is the direction I think we should take it, I basically don't get feedback on the quality of my work ever. I get feedback on whether they like the work or not. And it's quite hard to explain, but I think you'll get it. But those aren't the same things. Like clients' feeling about the writing that I do isn't necessarily based on how well that writing is actually going to accomplish its job. If I'm writing website copy, let's say a sales page for a course, for example, and it's written with conversion in mind, to take people kind of from top of the funnel, like cold traffic, top of the funnel, all the way down and almost convert them by the end of the page. I've had clients come back and be like, we really don't like long form sales pages. And my response is like, I can definitely do you a short form sales page as well. But I'm telling you, the long form sales page will convert significantly better. And we can run tests, just to prove this hypothesis. Yeah. And the client has come back to me, not on the quality of the work there or how well it's going to accomplish the goal, but just they came and said, I don't like this. So this is about the type of feedback you get. Like my clients will always give me feedback, but you're 100% right. It's missing that kind of expert eye from colleagues who have kind of similar base to you, right? Who can say, actually, you've missed a really good opportunity for a call to action in there. Your tone of voice isn't quite right. You've not really hit the mark. That doesn't flow with the structure that you've picked as well as it should do. I basically don't have a decent answer for that, like a complete answer. One of the things that I found, incredibly valuable is being part of an online community, because then you can reach people in your area of expertise all over the world. Some of them are incredibly experienced, and just, engage with these communities for the joy of it. But that way that you can actually get feedback from people who know what they're talking about and can kind of steer you in the right direction, point you in the right resources, give you the right training, change your mindset a little bit about how you're even approaching the project. It's absolutely invaluable. So my answer, I guess, would be like to try and find the communities of where those sort of people are hanging out. There'll be different ones that work in different ways. There are Facebook groups, there are Slack groups, there are forums, there are YouTube channels where experts kind of film over the shoulder kind of tutorials to what they're doing, and you can kind of almost unpick it and reverse engineer it. There's still nothing that I've found that comes close to what we were talking about at the beginning of the call, like sitting next to somebody and saying, oh, what do you think of that? Because there's so many things that fall in between the levels of importance, which by that I mean, it's important enough that I'm curious about what somebody thinks about this, but not important enough for me to bother them, whether that's email or putting a message to a community or something like that. There's still these little things that are almost falling in between the cracks, and I don't have an answer.
No, and I think that's the big challenge to overcome, isn't it, for the sort of this generation of professional people who are trying to navigate through this new way of working. Potentially, is those things always feel very minor in isolation. So, what do you think of this? Or would you use this word or that word? Or can you just look over my shoulder and just check that this sentence that I put in my email doesn't doesn't come across as too passive aggressive or whatever it might be. You because you don't have the option of doing that, you then have to just you lose the benefit of collaboration a little bit, because realistically you're not gonna. It takes an extra step when you're not sat in that environment around people. So for you to go, oh, do you mind just proofreading this email before I send it, is very different. It doesn't sound it, but I think in the moment it feels very different. So you just go, no, come over here, mate, and just have a look at this and tell me what you think.
Even if the person changes nothing, it's that reassurance that like you were along the right lines. And
exactly, but that's what I was saying before about it's a form of validation, isn't it? It's that sort of you then feel. People don't need to come over to you and go, that email is the best email I've ever seen. But if there was a nagging doubt in your mind and someone's come over and gone, no, I agree with that. That's exactly how I would have done it. Or I don't see an issue with that at all. That in itself is quite, it's validation of what you're doing. It's sort of reassurance. It's all those sort of good things that we feed off in terms of like emotional behavior. I'm no psychologist, but just, that's how it feels. That all those positive sort of connotations that come with that, you feel the benefit of.
Definitely. So I think that's probably a really good place to leave our conversation for today. Basically, we've just decided that we're both incredibly needy and just need constant validation. So why not leave it there? Rob, thank you so much for spending the time. Thank you everybody as well that has listened today on the Working From Home podcast. And we'll see you very soon. Anything you'd like to finish with, Rob?
No, I think that's all from me. I think I really enjoyed the conversation. I think it's a really interesting topic. I think it's interesting actually to talk this through and realise that there really is benefits of both, isn't there? I think what we're saying here is that the skill and the sort of the goal really for all of us is to try and find the benefit of both. Whether in my case, I think what I've realised today, talking it through with you, is that what I strive for is variety. That's what makes me tick. For other people, it'll be different, but I think knowing that then allows you to play to your own strengths and get the most from remote working the same way as you get the most from office working. So. Yeah, no, interesting, very interesting topic.
And that's it for today.
And it's been great to.
You've been listening to the Working From Home podcast with me, Nelson Jordan. We've been talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly side of remote work. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope you've enjoyed the time you've spent with us today. If you'd like to discuss the podcast, you want to make a new friend, or you're interested in working with me on a copywriting or digital marketing project, then visit nelson-jordan.com. That's nelson-jordan.com, where you can also sign up to my newsletter to hear about this podcast and other exciting projects. Until next week, goodbye.